the brothers who ran United States foreign policy for a decade. In 1953, President Dwight Eisenhower gave the position of Secretary of State to John Foster Dulles and the position of Director of the CIA to Allen Dulles. It is the first and only time in history that two brothers were appointed to head the overt and covert sides of American foreign policy. Under their leadership, the beginnings of the Vietnam War, the 1953 Iranian coup d'etat, the 1954 Guatemalan coup d'etat, and the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, amongst others, would come to pass. So much of the world's history as we know it today happened as a consequence of the decisions made during their stewardship. The best way to appreciate how significant those decisions were to the lives and futures of governments and people in several countries around the world is to start at the beginning of the lives and careers of these two brothers. Today, we will talk about the elder of the Dulles brothers and the 52nd United States Secretary of State, John Dulles. Born in Washington, D.C. on February 25, 1888, to Presbyterian minister Allen Macy Dulles and his wife Edith, his maternal grandfather, John W. Foster, was Secretary of State to Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd President of the United States from 1892 to 93, and his uncle, Robert Lansing, was Secretary of State for 5 years to President Woodrow Wilson, the 42nd President. He attended Princeton University to study law, and upon passing the bar exam, would join Sullivan and Cromwell, the prestigious New York City-based law firm. However, with the United States entering World War I, he left to join the army, but was rejected due to his poor eyesight. In 1917, his uncle, Robert Lansing, the serving Secretary of State, recruited him to travel to Central America and work for the State Department. In that role, he would advise Washington, D.C. to support Federico Tinoco, the dictator who was president of Costa Rica. He was also anti-German at a time when the United States was fighting the Germans during World War I. This would be the first instance of Dulles sacrificing the democratic domestic interests of a foreign nation for American global interests, but by no means the last. In 1918, following the end of World War I, President Woodrow Wilson would appoint John Dulles as legal counsel to the United States delegation to the Versailles Peace Conference to work under his uncle, Secretary Lansing, before rejoining Sullivan and Cromwell and specializing in international finance like his grandfather, Secretary John Foster. Amongst his achievements at the prestigious law firm was in designing the Dawes Plan, which reduced German reparations payments and temporarily resolved the reparations issue by having American firms lend money to German states and private companies. Under that compromise, the money was invested and the profits sent as reparations to Britain and France, which used the funds to repay their own war loans from the United States. John Dulles was involved in setting up billions of dollars of these loans through the 1920s until the Wall Street crash of 1929. Dulles was a prominent Republican who served as the chief foreign policy advisor to the governor of New York, Thomas Dewey, during his 1944 and 48 presidential campaigns as the Republican nominee, running against Democrats President Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman, respectively. In 1949, he would be appointed by Governor Dewey to replace longtime Democratic Senator Robert F. Wagner, who had resigned due to ill health, but lost the special election a few months later to the Democratic candidate Herbert H. Lehman. Despite being a Republican and an advisor to his opponent in the 1948 presidential elections, John Dulles became a trusted advisor to President Harry Truman on foreign policy, and in 1952 became the key architect of the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which ended the United States occupation of Japan, ensuring that Japan would stay on America's side during the Cold War and allowed the continued use of U.S. military bases on Japanese soil. In January 1953, the newly elected President Dwight Eisenhower appointed Dulles to be his Secretary of State, and he was duly confirmed. Already a strong proponent of the rollback foreign policy doctrine, his tenure was marked by conflict with communist governments worldwide, especially the Soviet Union, calling communism godless terrorism. That stance would lead to his first significant foreign policy action as Secretary of State, the Iranian coup d'etat of 1953.